Hello, and welcome to Football Country, a podcast about the curiosities and history of Brazilian football. I'm Isaac, and thank you for joining. Today we're diving into the 1950 FIFA World Cup, one of the most unique tournaments in football history. The 1950 World Cup took place just a few years after the devastation of World War II, and it was, in many ways, a turning point for both the sport and the global community. It was the first World Cup since 1938, and the whole tournament was filled with drama, intrigue, and a ton of unexpected twists. The story begins in 1946, right after the war, when Brazil seized an opportunity at the International Congress of FIFA. With most of Europe still recovering from the aftermath of the war, Brazil decided to host the World Cup. And honestly, they were pretty much the only viable option. You've got to think, there was a lot of destruction in Europe, and most countries weren't ready to host a global tournament. Brazil, on the other hand, was already passionate about football by the 1940s. They had a solid football league system, some huge stadiums, and they had been investing in sports infrastructure for a while. And get this, they'd also promised the biggest stadium in the world, the Maracanazo in Rio de Janeiro. At the time, it was going to seat 155,000 people, which was mind-blowing. They also promised FIFA to renovate the Pacaembu Stadium in São Paulo and the Ilha do Retiro in Recife, as well as build new stadiums in other cities like Belo Horizonte, Curitiba, and Porto Alegre. Brazil was ready to impress. And they did. It was a huge commitment. However, Brazil's initial desire was to host the World Cup in 1949, but due to logistical problems, FIFA pushed it to 1950. And even with that extra year, it wasn't smooth sailing. Because despite having easily selected a host nation, convincing other countries to participate was no easy task. Germany and Japan, two of the major football powers at the time, weren't allowed to compete due to their roles in World War II. And a lot of nations, even some football giants, were hesitant to make the trip to Brazil. Italy, the defending champions from 1938, were incredibly reluctant to play. They were still reeling from a tragedy in 1949 when a plane crashed, killing many of their star players. Italy actually demanded that FIFA cover the full cost of their travel just to agree to come. But despite all these hurdles, 32 countries signed up for the eliminatory phase of the tournament, out of 72 nations affiliated with FIFA. But things didn't stay that smooth. 16 of those nations dropped out before the group stage even started, and some countries like Argentina and Peru just walked away from the competition altogether, even after having gone through the effort to qualify. There are even rumors that Argentina dropped out in protest of Brazil being chosen as the host, due to the rivalry, but I personally think that that's a bit of a stretch. If they really opposed it that much, I believe that they probably wouldn't have even signed up in the first place. But it wasn't just Argentina. Other countries like India, Turkey, and Scotland had qualified, but they all backed out for various reasons, citing mostly logistics problems. FIFA scrambled to find replacements, and they invited Portugal, Ireland, and France to take their spots. But would you believe, all three declined. It was a strange time for international football. France, for instance, refused because the locations of their group stage matches would have required them to travel 3,000 kilometers, over 1,800 miles. That's a long, expensive trip, and at the time, it just wasn't feasible for many nations, especially the Asian and African nations that weren't represented at all at the tournament. So after a hectic qualifying stage, by May 22nd of 1950, the group draw finally took place at the Itamaraty Palace in Rio de Janeiro, and it was pretty different from what we're used to today. Instead, the tournament just had 4 groups. 2 of the groups had 4 teams, one had 3, and the last one, Group D, had just 2 teams, Uruguay and Bolivia. Group A had Brazil, Yugoslavia, Switzerland, and Mexico. Group B included England, Spain, Chile, and the United States. Group C had Sweden, Italy, and Paraguay. And of course, Group D only had Uruguay and Bolivia playing only one match. And here's the twist, only the winner of each group would advance to the second group phase. The winner of that phase would then go on to lift the World Cup, so the road to the trophy was anything but conventional. Brazil, as the host nation and favorites to win the tournament, kicked off the 1950 World Cup in style, with a dominant display over Mexico, genuinely thumping the tricolor 4-0. Despite decent performances from Yugoslavia and Switzerland, both of them defeating Mexico and Switzerland even drawing 2-2 with the favorites Brazil, neither were able to outdo the Brazilians. In Group B, we had England, Spain, Chile, and the United States. Now this was a group with some serious names, like Spain and England, but the drama was about to unfold here too. England, who were seen as the top team with the pomp and circumstance that comes from being internationally recognized as the modern home of the sport, they were only able to hang a win on Chile. The English delegation fell 1-0 to football powerhouse Spain in the Maracanazo, and somewhat embarrassingly suffered another 1-0 loss to the Group B caboose, the United States and Belo Horizonte. Now Group C was interesting, with Sweden, Italy, and Paraguay. Italy, the reigning 1938 World Cup champions, weren't exactly at their best after that plane crash tragedy, but they still managed to get past Paraguay with a 2-0 win. But their match against Sweden was a real turning point. Sweden managed to defeat Italy 3-2 at the Pacaembu Stadium, sending them into the next phase and leaving Italy behind. That was a big shock. Even though decimated just a year prior, Italy was still one of the favorites, but Sweden stepped up and delivered in a big way. And then Group D, the strangest of them all. Just two teams and just one game, Uruguay and Bolivia. Uruguay easily beat Bolivia 8-0 and they advanced into the next phase. So by the end of the group stage, we had 4 teams ready to battle it out for the World Cup title in a round-robin phase. Brazil, Uruguay, Spain, and Sweden. Now what makes this even more interesting is that Brazil as the hosts were seen as the overwhelming favorites to win. They had the strongest team, and all they needed was a draw in their final match to win the tournament. But this is where the real drama kicks in. Brazil dominated early with big wins to record crowds in the Maracanazo over Spain and Sweden. Uruguay, with relatively fresh legs, having only played one game so far, fought hard to finish second in the final group. Uruguay fell 2-2 against Spain. Uruguay drew 2-2 against Spain and defeated the dazzling Swedish team 3-2. With Brazil having thoroughly thumped 2 of their 3 adversaries, it was apparent to the press and Brazilian football fans that the job was done. It was just get a draw in the final match against Uruguay at the Maracanazo and Brazil were world champions. On the Sunday morning of the 16th of July 1950, the streets of Rio de Janeiro were crowded and joyous. 200,000 spectators made their way to the Maracanazo to see their country be crowned champion of the world for the first time. Angela Mendes de Moraes, mayor of the city of Rio de Janeiro, spoke to the crowd before the match declaring, quote, "You, Brazilians who I consider the winners of the World Cup. You, Brazilians who in less than a few hours will be declared champions by thousands of your compatriots. You, who have no rival in all the hemisphere. You, who beat any competitor. You, who I already greet as winners." Uruguay had their work cut out for them. Their coach, Juan Lopez Fontana, was determined that the best way to beat Brazil was to park the bus and try their hardest to stop Brazil's dazzling front line. His team didn't approve, and in his absence before the match, team captain Obdulio Varela addressed his teammates, stating, quote, "Juancito is a good man, but today he's wrong. If we play defensively against Brazil, our destiny won't be different from that of Spain and Sweden. Boys, those that are outside of the pitch don't play. Let the spectacle begin." End quote. The game began as the press and fans thought it would. Brazil's attack battered Uruguay's strong defense, but the Uruguayans held strong. Brazil's attack found itself immobilized by Uruguay. Any move Jair or Ademir, Brazil's star strikers, made, the Uruguayans answered with brute force and strong defensive tactics. The joyous carnival-like environment the Brazilian fans had brought with them dropped in its intensity due to the attack's frustration and inability to take advantage of the few chances the Uruguayans allowed them. The Uruguayans were no strangers to Brazil's playing style. They knew how Brazil played, and they came up with a strategy to counter that. They had done their homework. The Uruguayans were well aware of Brazil's offensive firepower, particularly their attacking trio of Zizinho, Jair, and Ademir. And what did they do? They marked them tightly. They were all over them. It was a tactical masterclass in shutting down the opposition's strengths. Their defensive strategy was built to run a tight marking system, especially on those key players. And it worked. Jair, usually so fearless and dynamic, was completely neutralized by the Uruguayan defense. In fact, he looked almost timid on the ball, which was very unlike his usual performances. And then there was Ademir, one of the best goal scorers Brazil had, who also couldn't find his usual rhythm. Zizinho, Brazil's playmaker, wasn't completely silenced, but he was under constant pressure. Gambetta, a key figure in the Uruguayan defense, had shifted into a center-half role specifically to track Zizinho's every move. And on the other side, Obdulio Varela, Uruguay's captain, one of the toughest players on the field, took it upon himself to mark Jair. The Uruguayans were determined to stop Brazil's creative outlets, and while Brazil's attacking trio wasn't able to utilize their usual tactic of fluid, interchangeable movements, the Uruguayans had already set up a defensive strategy that was impossible to break through. And that's exactly what happened. Brazil's trio, usually so lethal with their movements and creativity, was reduced to shadows of themselves. The Uruguayan defense was simply too organized, too aggressive, and too well prepared. Meanwhile, Uruguay's plan was coming to fruition. They broke down Brazil's defense, and their attack, led by players like Juan Alberto Schiaffino and Alcides Quigia, was causing problems. Brazilian newspaper A Noite described the match as, quote, "From the very first moments of the match, a disconcerting phenomenon was observed. The Uruguayans seemed to be the hosts, playing with ease, unaware of the adverse circumstances. There was a determination within them to win, and with all their forces were mobilized towards this goal. By knowing, through the continuity of the battles fought, all the resources and tactics of the Brazilians, the Uruguayans had pre-established an action plan and put it into execution in such a way that it nullified the actions of their opponents. In the end, they achieved their objectives, dismantling our defense and rendering our attack ineffective. To do this, they used tight marking, keeping a close watch mainly on Zizinho, Jair, and Ademir, which neutralized the offensive potential of the Brazilian national team. Jair, frightened, and Ademir lacking his usual mobility, were overwhelmed by the opposing defense, with only Zizinho managing to escape Gambetta's marking, who had turned into a center half, while Obdulio Varela took on the responsibility of marking Jair. All the tactics of the Uruguayans worked because the Brazilian attacking trio didn't use the movement tactics that had been so successful and effective in the previous matches." End quote. Now, it wasn't just about defense. Uruguay wasn't sitting back and waiting. They had a clear plan to attack, and it paid off. Brazil had the upper hand in the first half with a goal from Friaça in the beginning moments of the second half. But the party would only last less than 20 minutes. At the beginning of the 66th minute, Schiaffino would level the game. The crowd, while still confident in their legendary Brazilian side, was noticeably quieter. However, the crowd was completely silenced when Quigia scored the decisive goal, and with it secured the Maracanazo, one of the greatest shocks in football history. And that final goal was symbolic of everything. It was Brazil's loss, but it was also Uruguay's triumph. A triumph born from preparation, resilience, and an unshakable belief in their plan. Brazil's fear, their hesitation, and their inability to adapt to the Uruguayan tactics left them unable to cope with the pressure. It wasn't just a loss on the pitch. The fallout from the Maracanazo was immense. Brazil, who had already built the largest stadium in the world, had prepared themselves to win at home. But that defeat, in front of an overwhelming crowd of 200,000, shook the nation. Uruguay's victory changed the narrative of the 1950 World Cup and added yet another layer to the rich history of this tournament. The Maracanazo is a reminder that football is not just about talent, it's about tactics and preparation, and the mental strength of a team. Uruguay, the underdog, executed a perfect game plan, while Brazil, despite their talent, couldn't overcome the tactical genius that had been implemented against them. And that's what makes the 1950 World Cup so special. It's a story of tactical warfare, of a team who went in with a plan and executed it perfectly, against a Brazil team that, for all their brilliance, couldn't adjust to what was thrown at them. It's a testament to the unpredictable nature of football and the power of strategy. Thank you for joining me on this deep dive into the 1950 World Cup.